This video continues from the previous example of Chronicle Services with DTOs, and in this example we will be demonstrating how we run services with Docker, which allows our application to be run inside a number of containers. We will therefore be looking at what additions are required for this to work. This example is run on a Mac with the Docker desktop application, which is also available for Windows and Linux. The interaction with Docker desktop can also be performed via shell commands. The tutorial demonstrates Chronicle Services integration with Docker, rather than how to use Docker itself. It demonstrates one way of using Docker with Chronicle Services, but other customized Docker configurations can also be used. Again, we are building on the concept of an account balancer that has two microservices. For more information on setting this up, using this example, see the previous videos in this series. When using Docker, you can choose where your services are run. It is possible to separate your services so that they are each run in their own container. Alternatively, you could run several services in a single container. In this example, we are going to run the transaction service and the run transaction service in their own containers. In order for our program to run in Docker, there are two files that we have added. Firstly, the Docker file. This contains the information needed to build a Docker image. It contains all the dependencies that are needed to build and run the application, such as Maven and Java. Next, we have the docker compose.yaml file, which uses our image to run two containers. One of these containers is transaction, and the other is run transaction. It is important to point out this data directory that we have on line 26 and 39. This is required to ensure that both containers have access to the queues that are used to pass messages between the services. These are external to the containers themselves. Another thing to point out is that we have set up this environment variable of program args in each of our containers. This variable is used by our Docker file, so that when it is run, it firstly sets program args to transaction and secondly sets it to run transaction. This is the first program argument in main. If we look at main, one difference from our previous example is that it starts just a single service, as specified by the command line argument. Hence, in first arg, this determines which service will run. Another file to take a look at is the start.sh shell script. For simplicity, we have previously created this, but you could also run each command manually. At the start, this section captures the current directory. The next section checks if Docker is installed, and if it is not, it produces an error message and exits. Next, this checks if the image already exists, and if not, it uses the Docker file to build the Docker image. When it builds the image, it builds it with this name, account transaction example. Once we have run the script, we will see this under images in our Docker dashboard. It then checks for Docker Compose, and finally, this line runs the Docker Compose file. Now we are going to run the application using Docker. So in the terminal, we make sure that we are in the correct folder, and then enter the command that runs the shell script. We have set up Docker to take care of any dependencies that are required to run the program. Already here we can see that two containers have started running. If we now go over to Docker, we can see these two containers, and under images, we see the image with the name that we set in the shell script. If we go back to our containers and click on Run Transaction, here we can see all of our logs. We can initially see the changes to our two accounts, as in the previous video, and then we see the account balances are printed periodically every 5 seconds, which was due to a setting in our services.yaml file. In order to stop the application running on Docker, we can either stop it here, or if we go back to containers, here we can stop all the containers in this example at once. For more information about Chronicle Services or our other products, email us at info@chronicle.software.